According to the Federal Reserve, the American household debt hit a whopping $14.6 trillion in the spring of 2021. A recent CNBC report found that the average American has over $90,000 in debt, and that's a total combination of things such as consumer debt products, credit cards, personal loans, mortgages, and student debt. But the one item that was not mentioned on that list is divorce. And for some couples, a divorce is going to exacerbate that total, especially if the divorce is contentious. So, how does debt prior to filing for a divorce factor into the big equation when it comes to settlement discussions? Well, joining us to explain is one of New York's top financial experts, Donna LaScala. Donna is the president of Comprehensive Divorce Solutions, a certified divorce financial analyst, a financial neutral, and a registered financial consultant. Money, debt, and divorce are all in Donna's wheelhouse. Donna, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today. How are you?
Well, thanks for being here. So when is debt discussed during a divorce action?
It should be discussed at the very beginning when you start talking about all assets that have been accumulated during the marriage, because even though it's not an asset, it's still something that's normally been accumulated during the marriage and can be equally responsible for each party in the divorce. So unfortunately, most people focus on the asset division and they forget about the debt division. Things like credit card debt, things like mortgages, things like car loans, things that have been accumulated during the time of the marriage. The only thing that's separate and apart is something like student loan debt that you may have acquired and accumulated before you were married. Or even if it's been during the marriage, it's usually the individual's responsibility, not the couple's responsibility. But it is something that needs to be discussed from the very beginning because it's going to be a bone of contention if it's not.
Being a financial neutral, and you sit in a lot of these meetings with clients, how is debt divided during the negotiation process? And how is it determined who is going to pay what?
So in the same way that we look at what assets were accumulated, we also look at what debt was accumulated. So is it really a joint responsibility? Is it a joint credit card? Or is it debt that was accumulated to refinance the home, to do a construction loan, to go on a vacation? You know, all of those things that we think about that a couple does together, is it truly the responsibility of both parties? Or was one spouse, as we've discussed in the past, with financial infidelity, was one spouse really racking up the credit card bills unbeknownst to the other? So you have to do a timeline. You have to do a deep dive into how this all came to be. And sometimes you do find out that one spouse was really unaware or not really responsible for the debt. But most often than not, it's a joint responsibility. So it has to be shared in the same way that you do an equitable distribution on assets, you do an equitable distribution on debt. If one member of the couple is so out-earning the other, you can't really assign the equal amount of debt to the person who does not have the ability to pay it off at all. That would not be seen as equitable. So it's the same kind of process and same considerations that you look at when you look at assets and debt.
Do people understand how they spend their money? And then do they understand how they accumulated all this debt?
Well, you know, that's a very interesting question because part of the problem is that we live in an immediate gratification, delayed consequence society. And by that I mean, you know, we want what we want when we want it, which is usually now, and we hand over a credit card. So I also say, you know, we live in a plastic society because we hand over the credit card or the debit card, and we're really not having the same relationship with money as when you hand over that $20 bill and the other person takes it from you and then gives you a much smaller amount back in change. There's a very different relationship handing over a credit card or a debit card because you don't see the immediate reaction. It's a delayed consequence. You don't get that credit card bill for another month. You may not look at your bank statement that shows you all the debit transactions until the end of the month when it comes. So people are not as in tune and connected to the way they spend money. And so many people, when I ask them to sit down and do an expense accounting, have no idea. And they estimate and guesstimate, and I don't know. I don't know where the money is going. I don't really understand how I have no money in the bank, because it's a very indirect relationship that they have when they're not handing over money and getting change back.
I'm so glad you brought up credit cards, because that's leading me into my next question. What is the difference between credit card debt versus things like mortgages and student loans? Because those are debt also.
Absolutely. And some debt is actually better than others, because the sort of relationship that you have with debt, and it's credit versus debt, has everything to do with your credit score, which we'll talk about possibly later. The thing is that mortgages, student loans, car loans, they all have a finite timeline associated with them. So when you take out a mortgage, it's a 30-year mortgage or it's a 15-year mortgage, and it has an interest rate associated with it. Same thing with a student loan, same thing with a car loan. Those kinds of things can be refinanced. If interest rates, as they had been until recently, were going down, you could refinance, and your debt responsibility, your debt load would be lessened by the lower interest rate. But things like credit cards, that's what we call revolving debt. And unless you really stop using the card, it doesn't have a finite amount of time on it. Even though if you look on your statement, it'll always say to you, if you pay this amount of money every month, it's going to take you X number of years to pay off this balance. But we all know that if you're not putting the credit card away and not using it anymore, that balance is constantly changing. So it's a much different way of accumulating debt, and people don't even know what to do with it. They don't know that they can actually call their credit card company and try to renegotiate. And sometimes they get themselves into trouble because they go to some of those services that we've all seen the commercials for, debt consolidation. You have to be very careful with those, because a lot of times what they're really doing is declaring bankruptcy. And that puts you in a whole different ball game, which is not good.
You had mentioned credit score before, and I want to circle back to that. How does debt and divorce impact one's credit score?
So the thing that most people don't understand is your debt-to-credit ratio is everything when it comes to your credit score, and it also starts with your income. So if you're in a dual-income household, you have a higher starting point as far as the amount of debt that you can accumulate, because it's all based on your ability to pay it off. So once you separate out of a dual-income household, you're now an individual, and your credit score will be impacted because your income only is what's being factored as your ability to pay off that debt. So your debt-to-credit ratio immediately goes down, and that's why your score gets impacted immediately.
Well, one thing I know we immediately want to do, Donna, is get in touch with you. So how does one find you?
Well, the easiest way is to call 516-218-6919. That's my direct number. Or you can find me on the web, comprehensivedivorcesolutions.com.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this break.
At Comprehensive Divorce Solutions, Donna LaScala provides the tools for people to deal with assets, debts, equitable distribution, and retirement in divorce negotiations. We hold your hand during and after the divorce process, providing a roadmap of what happens next and into the future. Divorce is difficult whether you're initiating it or not. It's fraught with emotion. When you deal with emotions, you are not dealing with logic, making it more difficult to decide what to do with your money. Hiring a professional to assist you in walking down the money path is crucial to avoiding potentially costly mistakes. Donna's goal is to make sure that each individual knows how they are going to be able to survive and thrive during and after divorce. As a CDFA-trained mediator and collaborative financial neutral, Donna helps people get unstuck and move forward towards their post-divorce future. Call Donna LaScala at 516-218-6919, 516-218-6919.